Hey, welcome back. This is our third video on St. Augustine, and the first video was more of an introduction. The second video we talked about his introspection, his meditation on his own brokenness, and I wanted to specifically regarding the Confessions, and so this is also from the Confessions. Um, this is his conversion story. And what is a conversion story but a story where somebody remembers when God picked up the rock and found him underneath it? That's pretty much what a conversion story is. Maybe we get too preoccupied with the notion that it is a conversion. That is, it gives us the idea that we did something. Nonetheless, God does all the heavy work. Here's where Augustine talks about this real change. Now, when deep reflection had drawn up out of the secret depths of my soul all my misery, and had heaped it up before the sight of my heart, there arose a mighty storm, accompanied by a mighty rain of tears, that I might give way fully to my tears and lamentations. I stole away from Alypius, for it seemed to me that solitude was more appropriate for the business of weeping. I went far enough away that I could feel that even his presence was no restraint upon me. This was the way I felt at the time, and he realized it. I supposed I had said something before I started up, and he noticed that the sound of my voice was choked with weeping, and so he stayed alone, where we had been sitting together. Greatly astonished, I flung myself down under a fig tree. How, I know not, and gave free course to my tears. The streams of my eyes gushed out an acceptable sacrifice to thee, and not indeed in these words, but to this effect. I cried to thee, and thou, O Lord, how long, O Lord, wilt thou be angry forever? O remember not against us our former iniquities. For I felt that I was still enthralled by them. I sent up these sorrowful cries, how long, how long, how long? It's interesting, before I read further, notice how saturated his autobiography is with the Psalms of penitence, and it's interesting to me that he puts his own anguish of heart in those terms. What's also interesting is that he has anguish. So often people have, even today, will do things that they know are beyond the pale in terms of their morality. They break people. People are treacherous to one another. I can't say the last time that somebody came to me and said that they were broken, that they realized how big a mess they had made of their life. Now, maybe I'm hanging out with the wrong people. I don't know. But it seems like today we don't have this sense of how our actions not only affect other people, but how our actions may affect God in terms of our own brokenness and sin. Here, clearly, that is a driving force, and Augustine begins to recognize that his brokenness, that his sin, is that which calls for judgment, and he can't relieve himself of it. I was saying, look, pick it up in chapter 8, 12, 29. I was saying these things and weeping in the most bitter contrition of my heart, when suddenly I heard the voice of a boy or a girl, I know not which, coming from the neighboring house, chanting over and over, "Pick it up, read it. Pick it up, read it." I ceased weeping and began most earnestly to think whether it was usual for children in some kind of game to sing such a song, but I could not remember ever having heard the like. So, damning the torrent of my tears, I got to my feet, for I could not but think that this was a divine command to open the Bible and read the first passage I should light upon. For I had heard how Anthony, accidentally coming into church while the gospel was being read, received the admonition as if what was read had been addressed to him: "Go and sell what you have, and give it to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." by such an oracle he was forthwith converted to thee. So I quickly returned to the bench where Alypius was sitting, for there I had put down the apostles' book, and when I had left there I snatched it up, opened it, and in silence read the paragraph on which my eyes first fell. Not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. I wanted to read no further, nor did I need to, for instantly as the sentence ended, there was infused in my heart something like the light of full certainty, and all the gloom of doubt vanished away. That is, and then of course he talks to Alypius, and Alypius says that he had been dealing with something very similar, and then he has to go to see his mother. And to her great joy, we explained to her how it had occurred, and she leaped for joy triumphant. And she blessed thee, who art able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, for she saw that thou hast granted her far more than she had ever asked. For in all her pitiful and doleful lamentations, for thou didst so convert me to thee, that I sought neither a wife nor any other of this world's hopes, but set my feet on that rule of faith which so many years before thou hadst showed her in her dream about me. And so thou didst turn her grief into gladness more plentiful than she had ventured to desire, and dearer and purer than the desire she used to cherish of having grandchildren of my flesh. Well, of course, she did have a grandson. She just may not have met him yet. Imagine how awkward it was when Augustine, as a bishop, ordained his son from his previous life. That is not to cast judgment on poor Augie. He has gone through great vexation of spirit and soul, and it's interesting that he uses this kind of and which I love. He just takes up the book and he remembers Anthony and his conversion. He just picks up the book and plops it down and reads the first thing he finds, and that's how he decides. And what is it? Isn't it an interesting passage where it says not in rioting and drink? So he's forbidden to continue to pursue these lusts of the flesh, and instead opens himself up to the grace of God, and to make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. So Augustine experiences a powerful conversion in this. And these kinds of things happen. They still happen. People are awakened to God in profound ways that change them. The Apostle Paul on his road to Damascus, John Wesley at the Bible class in Aldersgate Street when he was reading Paul's text to the Romans. And what of Martin Luther when underneath a tree the lightning strikes and he pledges his whole life to God? Those are three easily tracked down illustrations, but people experience powerful conversion stories. My own is not nearly as powerful as that. As a 7-year-old, having been led in a prayer and dedicated my heart to God and in the sufficiency of Christ, wasn't really a powerful moment, not like Augustine's, yet it was something that awakened me to the work of God, and it was coming out of a place of need for sure. It wasn't a moral need where I was busy rehearsing all my sins. I remember being asked about this, and someone said to me, well, how much sinning could you do? You were only 7. And I said, God awakened me and saved me in a way that saved me from all the things that might occur, which is not to say that I haven't had foibles, mistakes, sins, brokenness, and all the rest, that I haven't had to wrestle in the same way that Augustine wrestled in different measure. What it is to say is people still experience the converting power of God in these moments when they've been wrestling with their life, and Augustine really is the person who was restless until his heart found its rest in God alone. So that's a really critical teaching and piece that we've got time to think about the trajectory of our lives and what the meaning of our lives is. If there's something that the current moment could be instructive about, it's putting the trajectory of our desires, our efforts, and balancing them with what we have to offer to other people, and what we have to offer to God. What is God calling us to do, to be in these moments? So Augustine illustrates that in a really profound way, as you can tell from his text. Now, in this next reading, where Augustine talks about time and eternity, this is where his Neoplatonism begins to express itself more earnestly. It says, I love the way this begins, by the way. Sometimes we miss these things. How then shall I respond to him who asks, what was God doing before he made heaven and earth? I do not answer, as a certain one is reported to have done facetiously, shrugging off the force of the question. He was preparing hell, he said, for those who pry too deep. It is one thing to see the answer, it is another to laugh at the questioner. And for myself, I do not answer these things. Thus, more willingly would I have answered, I do not know what I do not know. Then cause one who asked a deep question to be ridiculed by such tactics, gain praise for a worthless answer. So, how many times have you been asked a question about something you don't know? Why has God allowed a pandemic like this? Previous to that, why has God allowed these floods, this hurricane, this earthquake, that tsunami, this hunger, the 9/11? I mean, the answer is you don't know. And it's okay to posit that answer and acknowledge your faith in the middle of such an answer. We fall back on God's grace. But here's where Augustine begins to talk about time and memory. And he does so, let's see if we can pick it up. He's really talking about before creation. What periods of time would those be that were not made by you? So basically, God has sustained and created and undergirds all time. Nor dost thou precede any given period of time by another period. So there's no there's no gap with God, but God sustains time. God exists outside of space and time. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks me, I don't know. That's a perfect answer. What is time? Yet I say with confidence that I know that if nothing passed away, there would be no past time, and if nothing were still coming, there would be no future time, and if there were nothing at all, there would be no present time. But then, how is it that there are the two times, past and future, when even the past is now no longer the future? Is now not yet. But if the present were always present and did not pass into past time, it obviously would not be time but eternity. If then time present, if it be time, comes into existence only because it passes into time past, how can we say that even this is, since the cause of its being is that it will cease to be? Thus, can we not truly say that time is only as it tends toward non-being? And that is where he makes his mark. That passing time goes into non-being. What an interesting way to put it. Now, he is one of the very first philosophers, theologians, to deal with the concept of time, the past, the present, and the future. God sustains it all. I remember drawing on the board a figure, and it had a line, a demarcated line with 2 points on either end. And around that line, I ask people to imagine a sphere, and if I was fancy with a video, maybe I could make such an illustration. But the illustration serves this purpose: that the line that demarcates, that has a beginning point and an end point, represents all of time and all of space, and that the sphere that surrounds and supports that line is the presence of God. But yet God exists outside of space and time, incorporating it all into his grace and his providential care. You can read in, these are all little segments from A Little Reader by Hugh Kerr. He talks about the free will here, how God, what's the interaction between our will and God's will. That's a very provocative topic. We may come back to that at some point. He talks about Jesus as the mediator, which is we've talked about a little bit when we discussed Chalcedon. So Augustine, major influential character, and we will in the next part talk about how Augustine deals with the problem of evil, for that is one of his major impacts.